Episode 6 of The Acolyte is here, and we finally got answers. Answers to a lot of questions about Qimir, where he came from, and how this story might just come to an end. But from the dark side version of Luke training Rey on Ahch-To, or Yoda training Luke on Dagobah, to a possibility of Vernestra Rwoh being a villain in this series, to direct connections to Darth Plagueis himself. There was a lot in this episode you might have missed, so let's break it all down. Episode 6 was titled Teach/Corrupt. Now right off the bat, this title is just like a lot of things in this series, all just from a perspective. Is it Qimir teaching Osha? Is it Soul teaching May? Or is Qimir corrupting Osha to the dark side? Or better yet, is Soul corrupting May to the Jedi? This episode opens, as most do, with Osha waking up. It has really just become a meme at this point of Osha just waking up. She does it all the time. But she wakes up alone in a cave. She looks to her side and sees bandages, and she pulls up her shirt to see that her wounds have been tended to, not force healed. Contrary to what most Star Wars fans think, last week Qimir did not force heal Osha. Force heal is such a rare thing in Star Wars, only very few characters have ever used it, and Qimir is not one of them. Osha gets up and she's confused as to where she is. She was knocked out at the end of episode 5. She has no idea that Qimir was the one who took her to safety, but she quickly realizes as she goes over and checks this bag and sees one of May's blades inside. She walks outside to see an ocean in front of her. As it zooms out, it looks like she's on a planet very similar to Ahch-To from The Last Jedi. However, it is most likely not Ahch-To, as there's no evidence of there being a Jedi temple on this island, and we don't see the Porgs or the other natives on the island. However, this location might be a direct connection to Darth Plagueis himself, as this planet is most likely Baal Demnik. This is a planet that only exists in the Legends novel Darth Plagueis. In the book, it is a planet described just like this one, an ocean planet with rocky tropical islands, but more importantly, it is known to have rich deposits of cortosis. And later on in this episode, we see Osha looking at the wall where there is cortosis in the rocks. So although it has not been confirmed yet, it is most likely that we are looking at the planet of Baal Demnik. And in the Plagueis novel, both Darth Tenebrous and Darth Plagueis have been to this planet. And again, all of that is legends for now, until a lot of it is brought into canon like it is here in the Acolyte show. But for now, we're just led to believe that this is an unknown planet. Osha walks towards the water and sees that the ship is parked on an island across the way, and the only way to get to it is to swim across. And of course, that's on purpose. She looks over to see Qimir walking away, and she realizes who her savior truly is. We flash back to Kofar as we see Soul taking off. He's trying to call to Coruscant to tell them what happened in this forest, and he talks to a Jedi named Mog. However, the connection is not that good. I think Master Soul needs to upgrade his Wi-Fi plan. Soul tells Mog that his whole team has died as the holo disappears. We then see May walking through the ship as she hears a memory of 16 years ago when she was on this ship taking her test to become a Jedi. As she hears Soul say that he needs to talk to Vernestra, we see May try to sneak up behind Soul to kill him, but she stops herself as Soul walks past her and says, "Take the wheel, Osha." Now, some fans are already saying that how did Soul not know that it was May, not Osha, in front of him? Well, clearly his mind has been clouded. He just fought against what could have been a Sith Lord in the Forest of Kofar and lost his Padawan and 7 other Jedi. He was in charge of this mission and he failed drastically, and this is taking a toll on him quite a bit. So it's not that crazy to think that he wouldn't sense immediately that Osha is not the one standing right next to him. We then get to see Soul, and clearly he's very emotional, and emotions are not really the Jedi way. But I can't emphasize this enough, Li Jiangcha's performance in this show is insane. The guy literally learned English for this role, and he's stealing the show. We then get Basil. And Basil's just kind of doing his own thing this episode as he has Pip and he's trying to find where to plug him in. Basil knows that this is May and not Osha, but he's not able to tell Soul because Soul doesn't speak the language. Then we flash back to the unknown planet. We see Qimir take off all of his clothes and go for a swim. And when he does, there's revealed this massive scar on his back. Now there are 2 extremely important things going on in this scene. First of all, the scar is most likely from Vernestra Rwoh's laser whip, but we'll get to that. And the second thing is this water. Qimir later goes on to say that he was once a Jedi a very long time ago. And that's a very broad term. That could mean 10 years, that could mean 100 years, or anything in between. But I actually think that this water that Qimir is bathing in is some sort of Bacta-esque liquid that is not only keeping him alive, but keeping him younger than he actually is. And this again is very similar to something from Legends Star Wars. There's a character named Abeloth, who's most likely going to be coming to canon very soon in Ahsoka Season 2, who got her power in a very similar way by bathing in some water that was sort of like the Star Wars version of the Fountain of Youth. So is it possible that Qimir is a lot older than we actually know? Tell me what you think in the comments below. But Osha watches him as he goes swimming. She sees that he left his lightsaber unattended and goes and picks it up. And as she does, Qimir says, "How does it feel?" She immediately taps into her old Jedi training and gets ready for an attack. Qimir turns around and says, "It feels good, doesn't it, to hold one of those in your hand again? I'm sure when you left the Jedi Order, you didn't get to keep your lightsaber." Qimir swims back over and Osha says, "Stay where you are." To which Qimir responds with, "If you're not going to join me, I'd like to put my clothes back on." Qimir is playing on Osha's feelings, which Jedi are not supposed to have. And throughout this entire episode, Qimir is just proving time and time again, teaching Osha that the Jedi way is not the way.
This is the way.
As Qimir gets out, he says, "You're wondering if it's honorable to kill me like this. In the heat of battle, it's justified. However, a few hours later, it becomes vengeance." The Jedi way makes it so that Osha, in this instance, cannot even kill him by the rules of the Jedi Order. He's unarmed, and he's not currently a threat to anybody around them. Osha then asks, "Why bring me here? Why didn't you kill me? Am I supposed to be your prisoner?" To which Qimir responds with, "Prisoner, you're the one with the weapon," as he puts on a very light-colored shirt. This is a more visual symbolism to Qimir now going from an all-dark outfit to an all-light one, messing with Osha's perspective. Osha asks if he killed Sol, and he says no. Then she asks if he killed May, and he says no. But it's interesting that you asked for him first. It's a very strong connection between master and apprentice, and clearly Osha has been brainwashed by the Jedi ways. We then cut back to May and Sol as they're flying through space. Sol gives May a hug, still thinking that it's Osha, and tells her that it's time to make things right. He says it's time for me to face the High Council, to tell them everything! And he gets interrupted by the holo projector. However, Sol is at a point where he's going to tell the Jedi High Council what happened here on Kofar and what happened 16 years ago on Brendok. Whether or not the Jedi actually killed the witches or not. Because clearly Sol is hiding things from the Jedi, from Osha, from the audience. But they get interrupted by the holo projector that quickly turns off as the entire ship loses power. We then cut back to Coruscant where we get a conversation between Vernestra Rwoh and Senator Chewat. They're talking about the Senate voting to have a review of the Jedi Order to make sure that the Jedi aren't doing anything suspicious. And the senator says this shouldn't be a cause for an alarm. The Jedi are always transparent with the Senate. As little does he know, right now Vernestra Rwoh is not being transparent with anybody. But this conversation is cut short when Mog comes in to tell her about Master Sol's distress signal. He tells her that there were casualties, and that he said his entire team has died. Vernestra tells him to prepare a rescue team immediately, as we cut back to Osha and Qimir. And this might be the most important scene of the entire episode. Osha says, "You speak as if you were once a Jedi." To which Qimir responds with, "I was," confirming that Qimir is a fallen Jedi, very similar to a character like Count Dooku, or even Anakin Skywalker. But he follows this up by saying, "a long time ago." And like I said before, a long time can mean anywhere from 10 years to 100 years. But Osha says, "I've never heard of you." And his response is, "It was a really long time ago." By the time of this Acolyte show, Osha is 24, and at least the actor who plays Qimir is 38. But I don't think his character is going to be 38, because Osha would have heard about him if he was with the Jedi Order. I think Qimir was Vernestra Rwoh's Padawan almost 100 years ago. But again, we'll get to that. Osha then asks, "Why did you bring me here?" To which Qimir responds, "Why do you think?" And Osha says, "Leverage." She says that Sol will come and find me. He's found me before, and his strength with the Force is very powerful. And Qimir turns around and says, "You think that's his strength? That's yours, Osha, but somebody's ought to teach you that." And then he tells her, if you want to make it to that ship before sundown, you better start swimming. Or you can just wait for the tide to go out and stay a while. We then cut back to May on Sol's ship as we get the fight sequence of this episode. And we see Basil give us his best moves. And then he runs off, and Pip actually sprays May in the eye with some sort of oil. But sadly, May factory resets Pip. because she has no idea how to work on a ship, so she needs the droid's help. We then cut back to Osha, who follows Qimir back inside the cave. And she says, "What do you mean by my strength? You know, if you were once a Jedi, it's something you must keep exercising. And without training, it fades." And Qimir says, "That's what they want you to think. The Jedi teach that there is only one way to access the Force. And if you don't do it their way, then it fades. But there is another."
There is another.
He says, "Below the surface of consciousness are powerful emotions: anger, fear, loss, desire." To which Osha says, "That's the path to the dark side." Osha then says, "You murdered my friends." To which Qimir responds with, "I murdered Jedi. I killed those who threatened my existence." She says, "You killed Yord." And Qimir says, "A man who didn't hesitate to turn you in for a crime that you didn't commit? What about Jackie?" And Qimir says, "You had the same relationship you had with her as you did your master. One-sided." He says, "Why do you love people who will only go so far for you?" As he offers her some food, Osha says, "I am not my sister. I'm not that easily corrupted." As she walks back outside like she's ready to leave, Qimir follows her out and says, "Are you forgetting something? Weren't you going to kill me with that lightsaber that you're holding?" He says, "You stayed here to do something, so do it. Turn it on." Osha says, "A Jedi doesn't attack the unarmed." To which Qimir responds, "You still think of yourself as a Jedi? They didn't want you." And Osha says, "That's not true. I left because I chose to leave." And Qimir says, "Are you sure about that? What are you feeling right now? That anger, that rage, this is who you are. The Jedi saw it, and that's why they threw you away." Osha says, "The Jedi didn't throw me away." To which Qimir responds, "Then why aren't you a Jedi?" And she says, "Because I failed," as she ignites the lightsaber and pins him up against the wall. Qimir explains to her that he understands. He lost everything too. And when you lose everything, that's when you're finally free. Slowly but surely, Qimir is convincing Osha and me that the Jedi are not the right people in this scenario. The Jedi way, with the lack of attachment and care for anybody else in the galaxy, is not looking that good right now, especially to Osha. We then got back to May in Seoul on the ship. May tells him that she ran a diagnostic on the ship and it'll be about 5 minutes. And Seoul is distraught. He's wondering how he couldn't sense Chimir's true intentions when he met him in episode 2 on Olega. To which May says, "When you really want something, it can cloud your judgment." And Seoul really wanted to find May and rescue her. Seoul says that he sees how much of a connection that she has even to a machine. May says, "I've always been that way," talking about Osha having attachments to things, and she had to let go of all of that to become a Jedi. To which Seoul says, "I'm sorry you feel that way." To which May responds with, "How could you feel any other way? Having attachments is something that just is. And the Jedi live on without having attachments." And then she asks, "Have you told me everything about what happened on Brendok?" And Seoul responds with, "You were very young." And May says, "I'm not now, so you can tell me everything," as the power turns back on. And as the lights turn on, so does the light bulb in Seoul's head as he realizes that the person in front of him is not Osha, it's May.
It's gonna be May.
Seoul then knocks out May, and as he hears a transmission saying that there's help on the way, he blasts into hyperspace. Seoul is now currently on the run from the Jedi Order. And almost immediately after they jump into hyperspace, Vernestra Rwoh and the other Jedi arrive on Kofar. We then go back to the unknown planet with Osha and Qimir, and Osha asks if he gave her sister the same pitch about losing everything and then finally being free. And as Qimir is working on putting his mask back together, he says that he made a mistake with May. He thought that she wanted more than just revenge. He thought she wanted what he wanted. To which Osha asks, "What do you want?" And Chimir's response is the power of 2. This is a reference back to episode 3. 16 years ago on Brendok, Osha's mother talks to her about the power of 2. It's still unclear how Qimir knows about what happened on Brendok 16 years ago, whether he was there or not, but clearly he's playing on Osha's heartstrings, making a direct reference to what her mother said to her 16 years ago. He then lifts his shirt up so Osha can see his scar, and she asks him where he got it from. And Qimir again answers a question with a question by saying, "Where do you think I got it?" To which Osha says, "Somebody stabbed you in the back." And he says, "Someone threw me away." And Osha says, "Your Jedi Master?" Scars like this on someone's back are usually, in cinema and in television, scars from whips. And we're about to see Vernestra Rwoh take out her lightsaber, and it just so happens to be a whip. I think all lines are pointing to Qimir once being the Padawan to Vernestra Rwoh in the Jedi Order, and something happened that ended with Qimir leaving the Order and being lashed in the back. But Osha looks over at his helmet, and Qimir And Qimir knocks on it and says this is cortosis, handy against lightsabers. Now, cortosis is an ore in Star Wars. It's very, very rare, but it has the ability to disable a lightsaber for a few seconds. That's what we saw in episode 5. But he also describes it as a sensory deprivation headset like they used as younglings at the Jedi Temple. It's supposed to block out all your other senses so that it's just you and the Force. Qimir tells Osha to go try it on, to which Osha says, I don't trust you at all. And he says, yeah, you shouldn't, but you should learn to trust yourself. As he walks away, we see Osha sitting and contemplating going to put that helmet on. We then get a jump scare of Jeki's dead body back on Kofar as Vernestra and the other Jedi have arrived. They're looking at all the dead Jedi scattered across the forest as Vernestra hears what happened here. This is Force Echo. We saw it back in the Ahsoka show last year, and we've seen Cal Kestis use it in the Jedi games. She's hearing the battle that happened here before. Then Mog says there's no sign of the twins or Soul. They must have survived somehow. And he asks what happened here. And Vernestra, just like possibly her former Padawan, answers a question with another question. What do you think happened here? And he says, a battle. One versus many. His power extraordinary. And his sole aim was to leave no survivors. As there's one of the insects coming in from behind, Vernestra takes out her lightsaber, ignites it, and the laser whip comes out. She then says to Mog, they were all killed by a lightsaber. What does that tell you? And Mog says, a powerful Jedi has fallen. To which he follows up by saying, you don't think Master Soul was responsible for this? He says, who would be powerful enough to take out this group of Jedi Masters? And Vernestra turns and says something to tip the scales. And this is not the first time that she has said that in this series. And I think it will be revealed that this is something that Qimir used to say to her. But we cut back to May, who is waking up, and she is strapped down. As Soul says, I have no intention of harming you. He says we have a lot to do. We need to find your master. We need to save Osha. But first, you and I are going to have a talk. And he says, I had 16 years to think about what I was going to say to you if I ever had the opportunity. So you're going to listen. And it cuts away, leading to next week's episode where we're most likely going to see Soul explain what really happened on Brendok 16 years ago. But before the episode ends, we cut back to Osha, who's about to put on the helmet. And as she's looking at it, she looks over at the wall and sees cortosis in the rocks. Again, like I said earlier, most likely confirming that this is the planet from the Legends novel of Darth Plagueis. But May puts on the helmet and all she can hear is her own breathing. And that is the end of the episode. Now, right off the bat, this episode was an important one. Not only was it extremely important to show Osha and how she's actually battling with this fight between light and dark, but it also gave us so much information about Vernestra Rwoh and possibly her Padawan. It confirmed that Qimir was once a Jedi a really long time ago, whatever that means. And we finally got the dark side version of a training sequence, because training sequences in Star Wars seem to be a very common thing. It's a place to teach a lesson, which Star Wars is very good at. And the lesson of this episode is the Jedi are not the good guys. I rate this episode at an 8 out of 10. This was my third favorite episode of the series so far, behind episode 5 and 4, and it leads us perfectly into getting more flashbacks to Brendok next week and leading us into a finale that we won't forget. But tell me what you rate this episode out of 10 in the comment section below, and do you think Darth Plagueis will make an appearance by the end of this series? I explain why I think David Harewood was cast as Darth Plagueis in this video right here.